Greetings, everyone. My name is Nerea Hoft, Senior Marketing Associate at Collins Group, a division of Campbell Company. I would like to welcome you on this first day of summer on behalf of our entire firm to Giving USA 2017, a Northwest perspective, one of many in our free webinar series this year. Today is June 21st, and we are broadcasting live from our Northwest offices in Seattle. Before we begin the presentation, I'd like to quickly go through some housekeeping. First of all, I'd like to clarify the duration of today's webinar. It will last 60 minutes, that's 60, 1 hour as advertised, not 90 minutes as it may have said in your registration confirmation. That means you will earn 1 continuing education credit that is good with your participation with CFRE International, and apologies for any confusion about that. Also, to ensure a great webinar experience today, please close all programs running on your computer except for GoToWebinar, of course. We highly recommend that you call in using a telephone instead of your computer speakers. If you do that, please mute your phone just in case so you don't get any feedback. And if you experience visual issues, you can use your GoToControl panel to send us a chat. You may also contact GoToWebinar at their 1-800 number. About an hour after the webinar concludes, you will receive an email from GoToWebinar that includes information on how to download your CFRE certificate and view a recording of today's webinar. If you have any questions during the webinar, please feel free to type them into the questions box. I'll be monitoring that throughout today's session, and we will also hold some time at the end of the webinar for a Q&A. So with no further ado, I'd like to introduce our host today. First, we have Aggie Sweeney, Senior Counsel, who's trying to figure out how to advance the slide. So there we go. Oh, and I should also mention that, okay. Aggie Sweeney, Senior Counsel. Aggie is Chair of the Giving USA Foundation Board and is recognized as one of the top fundraisers in the Northwest. She has provided counsel to more than 100 organizations and 45 campaigns that have raised over $560 million. Welcome, Aggie.
Good morning.
We also have Kate Roosevelt, Executive Vice President. Kate recently took on managerial responsibilities for Collins Group and for the West Coast operations of Campbell Company. Over the past 20 years, she has helped more than 90 nonprofits raise over $500 million. Welcome, Kate.
Thank you. Good morning. Before we introduce the panelists, I'd like to go over what will be our agenda for this hour. So after introductions, Kate will be leading us through an introduction to the Giving USA 2017 data. We'll maybe take a few questions then, depending on time. Then we'll have our panel, and with several questions we have for the panelists and their responses. And then at the end, though, we plan to have at least 10 minutes to answer your questions. I want to encourage everyone to download Giving USA if you're interested. On the screen, we have the website, givingusa.org. You can get a complimentary copy of the Giving USA 2017 highlights. And if you're interested in purchasing the whole Giving USA report, either in digital or also digital plus hard copy, you can get that from the website. And if you enter Campbell in the code, you can get a 30% discount on that. So let me introduce our panel, and you'll be hearing from them a bit later. We're really excited to have each of them with us. First, from Washington State, Tiffany Carey. Tiffany is the Chief Advancement Officer at the Evergreen School, and there she oversees development, admission, and communications. In the last 3 years, she's helped to grow the annual giving participation by 59% and led a $20 million comprehensive campaign. Under her leadership, the school boasts record high enrollment. The endowment has grown by 600%, And annual giving annually exceeds its goal. Prior to the Evergreen School, Tiffany served as Director of Advancement at Virtue for 5 years, also in Seattle.
Thank you. Good morning.
And from Idaho, Stacy Faulkner is Donor Relations Officer for Planned Parenthood of the Great Northwest and Hawaiian Islands. She has served as a Community Relations Coordinator for St. Luke's Health System, and she's a Certified Health Education Specialist and teaches U.S. health policy at Boise State University. Welcome, Stacy.
Thank you for having me.
Great, we're delighted. And from Oregon, Nancy Stuber is President of OMSI, the Oregon Museum of Science and Industry. Under Nancy's leadership, OMSI has significantly increased attendance and membership, acquired land for future expansion, and extended statewide reach with a new marine science camp in Newport. In 2014, Nancy was honored by the Portland Business Journal as the Woman Executive of the Year nonprofit. Welcome, Nancy.
Thank you. Good morning.
Great. And you'll be hearing from the panelists later, but let's turn things over to Kate Roosevelt now and get the highlights on the data.
Thank you, Aggie. Kate Roosevelt here, and I'm going to walk through some highlights of the Giving USA data and where possible also add a bit of a Northwest perspective from some other data points available to all of us. So first of all, just a few words about the Giving USA report. As you may know, this is the longest running and most comprehensive report of its kind. The 2017 report is the 63rd annual report, and it's published by the Giving USA Foundation, which is the public service initiative of Giving Institute, and our firm is a proud member, and of course we're very proud to act as the current chair of the Giving USA Foundation. The Giving USA report is researched and written by the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy at Indiana University, and all of this is made possible by contributions from the member firms of the Giving Institute, like Campbell Company. Into it. The first slide that I have to share with you speaks to the sources of philanthropy in the United States. And we'll start off with what is perhaps the most important headline, which is that total giving in 2016 reached an all-time high of $390.05 billion. That's an increase of 2.7% in current dollars and 1.4% adjusted for inflation. And what's important to note here is that this is really moderate growth in giving in our country, and not surprisingly is really strongly bolstered by individual giving. What you can see here is that individuals account for 72% of giving in 2016, and it's interesting to note that in another study, 9 out of 10 high net worth individuals give in the United States. So that clearly has a big influence on this category. If we think a little bit more broadly about individual giving, you also see individuals show up in the bequest category that represents 8% of the total, and as an increasing part of the foundation category, which this year comes in at 15% of the total. Corporations, of course, are a very important source of contributions in our country, and they weigh in at 5% of the total, or $18.55 billion. For a little bit of Northwest flavor, I'm going to share some data points from the Philanthropy Northwest Trends in Northwest Giving report. The most recent edition was released in March 2017. And it reports data from 2014. So it's a little bit out of sync with this 2016 report, but I think the directions are important to share with you. And for example, we know that the Philanthropy Northwest member organizations, corporations, and foundations in 2014 gave $1.8 billion to Northwest nonprofits. And that, like we see in the national research, a significant amount of that comes from family foundations, and not surprisingly, a significant amount comes from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Just an interesting point, I think, for us all to consider. I'll also note in the foundation category that one of the reasons why that category is growing is that the giving from community foundations is really on the rise, and it was up 9% in 2016. So in terms of the categories of recipients of all of this generosity, you see here our typical pie chart that shows some pretty incredible results. And really there are two stories that we want to share with you here. One is the total amount of giving in each category, but also the percentage growth. And those two data points are interesting to look at. First of all, we see that religion continues to be the largest category of receiving charitable dollars at 32% of the total. Education weighs in at number 2, human services number 3, gifts to grant-making foundations. So again, looking back at the growth of foundation giving is now the 4th category, and health is here at $33.14 billion. Interestingly, the public society benefit category, which you see at 8% of the total, has experienced some very significant growth, and that is largely due to the continued growth of donor-advised funds, what are known as commercial or national donor-advised funds, not those held at community foundations, which show up in the foundation category. But if you compare this data point with the fact that Fidelity Charitable topped the Philanthropy Northwest, the Philanthropy 400 list this year, you can see just the incredible influence that donor-advised funds have on giving in our country. So into a little bit more detail, just some regional comparisons for you. Interestingly, in the Northwest, giving to health and education top our list. Health is at 38% and education is at 19%. And again, these data points are from the Philanthropy Northwest report, which I encourage you to download at your convenience. And a lot of the giving in the health sector, like that in across the country, is fueled by multi-million-dollar grants to research institutions. And in the educational sector, we know that giving there is driven primarily by major gifts to universities that are in campaigns, and also to early childhood programs. So for example, in the health category, in 2014, the Gates Foundation gave $156 million to PATH, which is an international health organization, to accelerate the development of malaria vaccines. And we know that in the early childhood education category, the Dennis and Phyllis Washington Foundation in Montana awarded $2.4 million to implement a academic readiness curriculum for all ages. Interesting comparisons to the national sphere as well. We see the kind of a flip of human services and education there. So the next thing we're going to look at is how have these different sectors of giving or sources of giving changed over time. And we can see here, I think, the headline that total giving has, from these various categories, has increased a cumulative 5.3% between 2014 and 2016. And we see that all categories except for bequests have grown over that time. And of course, this reflects the just obvious volatility, if you will, in giving by bequests, and we usually see some pretty large swings in that area. So pretty steady growth here, which is good to see. On the other side of the equation, in terms of those categories that are receiving charitable support, there are a number of things that I'll call to your attention in this slide. The first is sort of the remarkable percentage growth that we're seeing in both the international affairs category as well as the environment and animals category. The international affairs category growth, we believe, is being driven by attention on the refugee crisis, as well as the famines in sub-Saharan Africa, And we know that in past years, giving in this sector has been driven by what we call disaster giving, tsunami relief, et cetera. And we believe that some of the growth of giving in the environment sector is driven by an increasing awareness of climate change. And certainly, I think we'll see in this next year's report growth attributed to what some of us call rage giving in the wake of the election and concerns that people have about pullbacks to environmental regulations and protections. So we've got growth in international environment. Number 3 would be the education sector. Number 4, arts, culture, and humanities. All of those experience 10+% growth in this 2-year category. In 2016, very similar results. Just interesting to note that the top 2 in terms of percentage growth, again, were international affairs and education, followed by the public society benefit category, which I mentioned earlier, and then the environment. As we think about total giving over time, again, this is the 63rd annual report of the Giving USA. We're at an all-time high, and we also see that over time, giving has steadily increased every year since 1976. And if we think about this in current dollars, we see that there were 3 years that we saw declines, 1987, 2008, and 2009. And in inflation-adjusted dollars, which is represented by those yellow towers or bars, you can see years in which there were declines or holding steady related to recession years. So clearly what we know and assume to be true, which is that giving tracks, generally speaking, with the performance of the economy is shown to you clearly here in this slide. In terms of giving by individuals, a few highlights that I'll share with you. Again, this category is up. It's up 2.6% when adjusted for inflation. And one of the things that we know in 2016 is that there were fewer very large mega gifts of $200 million or more given by individuals in this year. Interestingly, 2 of the mega gifts made in 2016 came from Northwest residents. Phil and Peggy Knight of Nike fame topped the 2017 Philanthropy 50 list, and their largest announced gifts were $500 million to the University of Oregon and $400 million to Stanford University for graduate school scholarships. When we look at giving by foundations, we know that family foundations play a huge role in driving giving in this sector, and in fact, Giving USA estimates that on average, giving by family foundations comprises 64% of giving by independent foundations each year, and is 48.7% of total foundation giving in 2016. And this category includes, again, family foundations included in that independent foundation category. Community foundations, which I mentioned earlier, are up 9.9%, and giving by operating foundations as well, which increased 4.5%. So a very strong category of giving. Giving by bequest, as I mentioned earlier, is where we see the most volatility over time. You can see a drop in 2016 of 10.1%. And giving by corporations is up in adjusted, when adjusted for inflation, 2.3% in 2016. And this category does include corporate giving of cash and in-kind contributions that are made through corporate giving programs, as well as grants and gifts that are made by corporate foundations. The CECP's 2017 Giving in Numbers survey of leading global companies, which is conducted in association with the Conference Board, revealed that nearly half of the 209 largest U.S. internationally based companies increased their giving in this same period of 2014 to 2016. We always like to look at this slide because it really illustrates how dollars are moving between categories, let alone how they're growing or shrinking on their own. And the headline that I'll share with you here is that what we see over time from the mid-70s now to the mid-20 teens is that the individual giving category is shrinking and the foundation category is growing. And that is largely due to the fact that more individuals are shifting resources to foundations and giving through their foundations.
We have just a couple of questions from the audience if you want to take a moment, Kate. Carrie asks, is the rise in corporate giving from the register transactions, being with your purchase you make a donation, like when we go to Amazon and that sort of thing?
That is a good question, and I don't think that would be captured in this data. I don't think so, because again, the major source of data for this report are 990s, where donors are itemizing their giving, and I don't think that kind of giving would show up here.
Great, thanks for clarifying that. And one more question about bequests. Do the bequest numbers reflect bequest giving only, or do they include other planned gifts, including income gifts such as CRTs?
Well, that's a great question, and I believe that it includes bequest giving only.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great questions. Keep them coming. So a few more slides here. In terms of our trends in total giving, here you see again the march upward over time, with some dips that correlate with recession years. Again, we topped out at $390.05 billion this year. And I think it's important to note that the average year-to-year change in total giving between 1976 and 2016 was an increase of nearly $9 billion in current dollars. And that makes our current dollar change in total giving between 2015 and 2016 much larger than the 40-year average. So some significant steps forward here. When we think about individual giving in its relationship to disposable personal income, we know from this chart that it has remained stable at about 2% in 2016, which is the same percentage as in the years 2012 to 2015. So the degree to which someone's disposable personal income is tied to their total income, this really is a key determinant in how much a person's household or how much a household gives to charity in a given year. In terms of giving, corporate giving as a percentage of corporate pre-tax profits, we can see that since the early 2000s, this number has declined from 1.6% to 0.8%, and that in the last 4 decades, corporate giving as a percentage of corporate pre-tax profits has averaged 1.1%. The average rate of growth of corporate giving was 7.2%, and the average rate of growth of corporate pre-tax profits was also 7.2% during the same period. So something for us to think about. In terms of giving by type of recipient or category, this shows 5-year span since, again, 1977. We're going to share some more specific detail on 4 categories in particular. But what I want to point out to you here is that the education sector, which is the second from the top, has received between 10 and 15% of total recipient contributions in the past 4 decades, and giving to education has been at its strongest in the last 4 5-year periods. We also know that the share of total giving to human service organizations remained at 12% for the 5-year period beginning in 2012, which is interesting to note as well. Giving to foundations. So this is the first of 4 categories we're gonna dip into a little bit more deeply. We know that giving to foundations amounted to 10% of total giving in 2016. Contributions to foundations increased 3.1% this past year to $40.56 billion. and adjusted for inflation, the giving to foundations category increased 1.8%. Notable gifts to Northwest foundations include a 141.4, this says million, but I think it's billion, gift from the Bill and Melinda Gates to their family foundation. It may be million, we'll double check that. And 2.2 billion from Warren Buffett to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And you'll remember that Warren Buffett, when he signed on to the Giving Pledge, made a commitment to do that through the infrastructure and the visionary thinking that resides at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. In terms of giving to education, this subsector again amounted to 15% of the total in 2016. For the Council for Aid to Education, according to that organization, contributions to higher education institutions in particular increased 1.7% in 2016. When you adjust for inflation, that number actually is almost at zero, so that's interesting to note. And just in terms of the Northwest view of this, 2 Northwest universities are in significant campaigns with publicly announced goals that exceed $1 billion. The University of Washington late last year announced a $5 billion campaign that they're working to reach by 2020, and they're well on their way with over $4 billion raised. And we mentioned earlier the gift from the Knights to the University of Oregon. The University of Oregon is striving to reach a goal of $2 billion. So we know that in the Northwest, giving to education is really a significant portion of giving overall. In terms of giving to health, we believe that while this category is up, we see that it's up 8%. I was on a webinar last week with the head of the Association of Healthcare Philanthropy, and he noted that a lot of giving in this sector is being affected by the uncertainty around the Affordable Care Act and efforts to repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act. So there's some uncertainty in the marketplace. We also know that giving to the sector is primarily driven by grateful patient programs. Interestingly, online giving to healthcare organizations analyzed by the Blackbaud Index grew by 11.9% in 2016. And the larger gifts in this category went to support medical research, medical centers, and hospitals and health charities as well. It's also noteworthy to mention that the Providence St. Joseph Health announced the launch of its Institute for Mental Health and Wellness with an investment of $100 million to support programs across the Northwest and neighboring states. So we are seeing an increasing interest in activity philanthropically around the idea of mental health and mental health services. Finally, I'll point out a couple things in the arts and culture sector that are interesting to note. Again, this sector accounts for 5% of total giving, and it is one of the fastest growing sectors over the last 2 years. And we know that many of the larger arts organizations in the Northwest are in significant campaigns at this time, and we were excited to celebrate the completion recently of the Museum of Flight's 4-year campaign that raised nearly $80 million. So campaigns and campaign activity in the arts and culture and humanities sector in the Northwest are really an important driver of philanthropy. And like giving to health, online giving to arts organizations has also been performing very strongly. In fact, it grew more than any other channel of giving in the arts and culture sector in 2016. So thank you for walking through patiently a fairly high-level review of the data. We do encourage you to grab a copy of the report and spend time with it. I think it is close to over 100 pages of great information and stories from a number of sources. And at this point, we will turn it over to the panel for discussion. And back to Aggie.
Great. Thanks so much, Kate, and thanks for going through so much data quickly. We're excited. We have 123 people on the webinar, and I know in some cases there's multiple people listening in from that site. And we know that many of you will have questions, and we'll make sure to get to some of those after we hear from our panel. And we can stay a few minutes after the end of the hour, 10 o'clock Pacific time, 11 o'clock Pacific time if needed. So I know many of you joined us after we did the initial introduction, so let me once again introduce our panelists to you. And let me talk about some of the special perspectives. Tiffany represents the independent school sector. She's also the only panelist from Washington State. And she works in a school that has a donor base that includes many high net worth tech families. So as you hear from Tiffany, you may hear some of those unique perspectives. Stacy is our only panelist from Idaho. She works in the health services sector with Planned Parenthood and often thought of very closely aligned to human services because so many of the women and families served are lower income. And Stacy brings a unique perspective as part of a national organization that's helping to lead the liberal resistance and working and raising funds in a conservative area. And then Nancy has, again, unique perspective in that she's from Oregon and represents museums and a statewide educational organization. And her perspective related to museums is specifically those that focus on science and technology. So without any more introduction, I'd love to hear, how does your experience mirror or differ from the national trends? Nancy, do you want to go first?
Sure, thank you. It's really interesting to see these data trends, and just at a global scale, I would say that we have seen year-over-year increase in total giving as well. That's in part because of trends, I believe, that we see on a broader scale, but also work that we've done here internally to make our messaging clearer and to build our fundraising capacity. But we have seen, we've had our most successful fundraising event, our gala ever, but we are seeing a bit of a slower growth in corporate giving, and in Portland in particular and in Oregon, many corporate mergers and headquarter moves have made sponsorships much harder for us to get.
Okay, great. Tiffany, would you like to go next?
Sure. Evergreen's experience does entirely match national trends. We had a 4% year-over-year annual giving growth in both total raised and corporate giving. We also saw a 16% increase in attendance at our auction, which drove a 13% increase in total raised. So overall, donors were very generous in 2016.
Okay, great. Thanks. And Stacy?
Yeah, so I did have an opportunity also to talk with a colleague at the Idaho Nonprofit Center and just talked a little bit about what giving was looking like here in Idaho. And as mentioned by the other panelists, there is a very steady trend in an increase in total giving, and that holds true, pretty true across all sectors and organization types. At my organization in particular, at Planned Parenthood, we have seen, I think it's fair to say that the more partisan politics grow, the more strongly we see some of our donors coming out in support and really to protect the work that we do and how that work aligns with their personal values. And our giving has truly been off the charts the past couple of years, most especially since the election, but even leading up to that time as there was the beginning of rumblings about a defunding effort and some of the recent smear campaigns that we've seen directed at our organization.
Great, thanks. So are any of you seeing any changes in the profile of your donors? Maybe, Stacy, you can go first.
Yeah, sure. And in fact, if you want to go back to that last slide with the images, that this I think is a really good demonstration of what we're seeing. And I would say overall, donor demographics are changing, and that's probably true across many sectors. We are definitely seeing younger donors engaged, millennials engaged, more people of color. Being Planned Parenthood, we still have almost an entirely female supporter and donor base, but we're seeing more non-binary folks, more people who identify as genderqueer, and really just kind of expanding that tent of support for Planned Parenthood. But I would also like to point out that we are finding champions in unexpected places as well. And the pictures that you're looking at on this slide, the top left is our Meridian Health Center in Meridian, Idaho. That's where I work. So this is a pretty common occurrence at our health center, especially because we have an anti-choice organization that has purchased lots on either side of our building so that they can give lots of room for these protesters to be very near us and near our patients. And the picture that you're looking at on the right is a gentleman by the name of Fred Alleman, who has a family foundation, and that's his daughter standing with him, Cynthia. And they decided as a family that their priority for their philanthropy for the next few years was going to be Planned Parenthood, and particularly our education program. So with that in mind, they made the decision to underwrite what we call our Teen Council program for the very first time here in the Treasure Valley, that's Boise and the surrounding area. And the youth that you see there on the bottom left are the first class of Teen Council, which is a peer-led sex ed program that really not only educates youth about their own health and sexuality, but really starts training that next generation of advocates and healthcare providers that support our mission and services.
Great. Thanks. And still with that same question, are you seeing any changes in your donor profile? Tiffany, let's hear from you.
Sure. It's a really exciting time for Seattle. The economic tech boom has really shifted the demographic of our donors and increased the capacity for major gifts. So in 2016, we saw a 16% increase in our leadership level donors. We're also seeing, we saw a 41% increase in securities transfers, again, attributed to the stock market and just the growth in Seattle.
Is much of that Amazon stock?
Much of that is Amazon, yes.
Yes. Great. And Nancy, what are you seeing for OMSI and in Oregon?
You know, OMSI has been in the community for 70 years and is really beloved and has a really strong base of local donors. The opportunity for us as they are getting older and many, many new people are moving into the area is to grow the donor base and then really look at that next generation. And to do that, we need to think differently about the opportunities that we provide. We find that the people moving into Portland in record numbers are younger, creative class, more diverse, and they are demanding more from the affiliation with us, and they're less loyal than those longtime supporters. So it allows us to be thinking about creative and collaborative ways to have projects and things that really connect to that younger and more diverse donor base.
Maria?
Hi, we have a question from Peter Drury. Hi, Peter. Referencing the old Seven Faces of Philanthropy book, donors who are altruist, socialite, investor, etc. It would be interesting to hear Aggie or Kate or the panelists reflect on which of those they're seeing more of, less of, or who they would add nowadays. Is there a new face?
Does anybody want to respond to that? Yeah, you definitely, Tiffany is seeing the high-tech wealth, which back when that work was done, it wasn't even a sector that had hardly started to emerge at that point.
Yeah. I think that, the investor donor profile, such as it is definitely more out there. We just did a session at the AFP Advancement Northwest conference on this topic, and some of the takeaways for me are that this type of donor is looking for measurement, and in some cases they're willing to fund capacity within organizations so that they can do a better job of measuring their work and their outcomes and their impact. And then, of course, there are others that are just looking for the data to help drive their decision-making about where they want to invest. So I think it is definitely a profile that we all need to pay attention to.
So let's move on to what we're seeing in terms of changes in political, how the changes in political priorities are impacting your fundraising programs. Of course, Giving USA talks about a 12-month period, and the election was in November. So the impact post-election didn't affect the Giving report a lot. I think we'll see the impact of changing political priorities much more in the 2018 report. But I know for some of you, you're living some of these changes every day. Nancy, do you want to start? Do you have any perspective on how changes are impacting fundraising for OMSI?
Well, I agree with your assessment that we haven't seen a numeric effect that we can directly correlate, but the political climate has certainly helped us hone our own case statements, and particularly around the need for investment in science education and equity. And we're finding that those messages connect very strongly to individual donor motivations. So in some ways, it is helping us to connect our message and our core motivations to the larger picture nationally. There are some other issues, though, that are feeling very urgent, and things like homelessness, that is such a big issue, healthcare, those things that tend to get attention, and you see those increases in giving in those sectors, and sometimes pull away from things that are more foundational and longer-term payback on the investment, like education. So we're seeing both sides of it, I believe. The trend that seems to be most important for us to pay attention to is equity and inclusion, and the need to make sure that we're not leaving behind large sections of our population. And in a state like Oregon that has a very strong urban-rural divide, the fact that we're providing programs across the state and we can be seen as a bridge to that divide has been really valuable.
Great, thank you. And Stacy, I know at Planned Parenthood, you're living the impacts every day. What can you share with us?
Well, I would definitely echo what Nancy was saying about the urgency. And in our case, as a healthcare organization, and a healthcare organization that's often specifically named in political debate, we are seeing our support has just gone through the roof since Election Day. And it was building over 2016 being a very important political year, but November 8th with an election that took a lot of people by surprise, this really absolutely blew all of our projections out of the water. In fact, between November 8th and December 31st, we raised what would be equivalent to 60% of our 2015 annual total in just those 7 weeks. There was a huge spike in both online and offline giving, and that was true at the federation level and for our affiliate. And I think a lot of that is because our donors see themselves as funding the resistance, as you mentioned earlier. They are the thin pink line, right? So it's kind of like you want to come after Planned Parenthood, you have to get through us first, because we are going to be here defending this organization who's been here for us, who serves 1 in 5 women in this country, and that, you know, our values around reproductive justice as a piece of the broader social justice movement are not something that we are going to back down from.
Thank you. Let's switch gears. We know in recent years there's been lots of attention given to Giving Day, whether it be a focus geographically or on Giving Tuesday, and then also crowdfunding efforts. I just wanted to ask if any of you have experience with this and how, with any of these, and how it may be impacting your program. Stacy, do you want to go ahead and go first?
Sure. My affiliate of Planned Parenthood is a 4-state affiliate. We cover Hawaii, Alaska, Washington, and Idaho. So we have the unique opportunity to participate in several of these statewide giving days. And Idaho Gives, which took place in May, happens just about a week before Give Big there in Seattle, has typically been very successful for us. We actually came in first place this year in total money raised. And I think that was something that our donors were not going to let not happen. Like we really were not willing to feel a loss again when it came to women's access to health care. And when I had a conversation with the Idaho Nonprofit Center who sponsors this day, they said in their experience, it's really organizations like ours. We're very lucky. We have 24 people in our development shop that are most successful during these giving days because we can specialize. We do have people working on the direct response piece. We've got people soliciting matching gifts through the Major Gifts program. We have a very strong marketing and communications presence to get this information out to our donors, where they felt like the smaller nonprofits who either aren't as savvy on social media or just don't have the resources had less success on those days. And we also had great success during Give Big, and even up in Alaska where they have their Pick, Click, Give program for permanent fund disbursement. If people choose to allocate those to charities, we came in second up there. So I think that just speaks a lot about how people see our work right now and what their priorities are.
So Tiffany, you're in Washington. Does Evergreen School participate in Give Big?
We participated in 2016, but not 2017. The timing of it is tough for a school being held in May. So I'm considering participating in Giving Tuesday next year. That will be within our fundraising cycle better, and doing a targeted effort at that time.
Great, good. And Nancy, how about in Oregon? Is there anything equivalent in Oregon, and what does OMSI tend to participate in?
Well, Giving Tuesday happened in Portland, and but we've found that it's not a really big opportunity for us. It is a good way to raise the visibility about philanthropy, but what we find is that we have a strong brand, we have a loyal following, and we have a strong social media presence, and so those strengths seem to be better leveraged by ways that we would control the message and the giving platform ourselves. So we are experimenting right now with a crowdfunding campaign, and a big part of that is awareness building and just raising the visibility of the work that we're doing in a very crowded campaign environment.
Okay, thanks. So I have just two more questions for the panel. Earlier we mentioned the great success that the Evergreen School has had with endowments. And we know out here in the Northwest that many organizations are just starting to build endowments, quite different from our counterparts on the East Coast and the Midwest. So Tiffany, why don't you share with us what has worked for you? Your results are incredible.
Sure. Yeah.
And I think we have some visuals to go with this too.
We do. Yeah, Evergreen just closed a $20 million campaign that was to fund construction and also grow the endowment. I found donors to be very responsive to an endowment appeal, even those with very young children at an elementary school, kindergarten families. The idea of leaving a legacy really resonated, as did a gift to support the school in perpetuity. So we were really thrilled, and you can see the endowment growth over the last couple of years, and we'll continue to grow with pledge receivable.
Great. Well, congratulations on that. I know many schools are envious of your terrific
Thank you.
And Stacy, I know Planned Parenthood is in a centennial bequest challenge. Can you tell us about how that's going?
Sure. So Planned Parenthood turned 100 in 2016, and a part of what was considered at that time is how do we achieve our vision for the next 100 years? And one of those answers was the bequest challenge, which is basically a way that donors can maximize the impact of their bequest by providing immediate assistance and long-term support to Planned Parenthood. And so the way that works is the donor would name Planned Parenthood in their will or their living trust, or as a beneficiary of their retirement or financial account, and they let us know about it. And they can identify Planned Parenthood Federation of America or any of the existing affiliates. And when they name that, the affiliate or PPFA then receive a grant of 10% of the value of the future gift, up to a maximum of $25,000. And what that's looked like for us and our affiliate is, to date, 53 documented bequests with a total value of over $20 million. And the challenge grant funds we've received from that are about $450,000. And those are actually dispersed this year in 2017. So it's just been a really great way to inspire people to make an impact with their gift now and in the future. And we have about $3 million left in that challenge grant pool nationally. And so what I've heard is that PPFA anticipates that campaign will end sometime around the end of 2017.
Great, thanks. And Nancy, as you mentioned earlier, OMSI is a 70-year-old organization. What's your history with endowment?
Well, we are on the path. We're in the journey. You know, Aggie, as in working with us, that we have had a lot of, immediate needs that sometimes supersede the work on endowments planning. But I'm really pleased to say that we have invested in the last few years in our planned giving programs. We have a long range, a 20-year vision, so we're able to include endowment as a critical part of our fundraising strategy to achieve that vision. And we have more work to do now in how to grow endowment as part of future campaigns that will address and find the right balance between immediate needs and long-term growth.
Thanks. And then our final question for our panel, is there anything else on your mind in terms of changes you're seeing in fundraising and how your organizations are responding to current trends? Anybody?
This is Nancy. I would just add that a colleague here also heads up the Western States Arts Federation, and so as we were able to talk about arts and culture, and OMSI fits in that category, although our donors think of us as part of the education ecosystem as well. But really for the arts and culture organizations, that there's a couple of trends that we're seeing. One is a movement to more public-private partnerships that are coalescing around big, compelling ideas. One is around diversity and equity that I mentioned before, and that is a compelling part of the motivation for donors to arts and culture as well as education. And then that it's encouraging for us to see that there's more of an interest now in interdisciplinary projects and supporting partnerships. That idea of collective impact seems to resonate, and that we're seeing both institutional funders and some corporate funders move away from the more rigid categories of funding to thinking more broadly about interdisciplinary projects.
Great, thank you. Tiffany, anything else that you would like to add?
Well, Seattle's business environment is just booming, and as is the donors' capacity to give. But most of our donors are new to philanthropy, so the ongoing challenge is educating families and donors about a culture of philanthropy. They're very eager to learn, and we've had some great conversations, but it will be a continuing challenge.
Great. And Stacy, anything else that you'd like to add?
Sorry about that, I was on mute. I would say that the ongoing challenge for us is always how U.S. politics is affecting our ability to do our jobs. And right now that is trying to anticipate what the future of the Affordable Care Act is going to look like. We know that the Senate GOP has been working behind closed doors on their secret repeal and replace bill that no one has seen, even though they're anticipating a vote on this as soon as next Thursday. And but there should be some discussion draft released tomorrow. Of course, we're anxious to see what that means for our Medicaid patients, for our Title X funding, and then most importantly, how we take that information and use it to motivate donors to help us close whatever gaps may appear by finding ways to target their passions, whether that's our clinical services, our education programs, or our political advocacy.
Good. Thank you. Thank you all. So we have some time for your questions, but before we move to that, please join me in thanking Tiffany, Stacy, and Nancy for joining us on the panel, and thanking Kate for presenting the data. And now, Nerea, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thank you, Aggie. We have a couple questions about donor-advised funds. First of all, how the gifts directed from donor-advised funds are represented in the numbers, if they are at all, and have the panelists seen an uptick in gifts coming from community foundation donor-advised funds or from commercial donor-advised funds?
I should do a shout out for the Giving USA report. There's a special chapter this year just on donor-advised funds at the front of the book. So if you do decide to get the whole book, please pay attention to it. There's a lot of data there, and it's a bit hard to just in 30 seconds condense it, other than to say, as Kate mentioned earlier, that giving to donor-advised funds continues to be a very popular giving vehicle. So let's hear from the panelists. Maybe Nancy, your experience?
I think we're finding, just as you say, that the increase in there's being a bit of a shift from individual giving through the traditional channels and more to donor-advised funds, and we've had really an excellent partnership now with the Community Foundation to help direct interest toward the work that we're doing from their donors.
Tiffany, anything you want to add?
I would agree. We are seeing an increase in donor-advised funds gifts. I can't quantify it, but anecdotally, we have seen growth in that area.
And Stacy? I'm not
You're muted.
Yeah, I'm not hearing from
Oh
Stacy.
my gosh.
So.
Just talking to myself again. It's a little bit tricky to answer just given the surge that we've seen in giving generally. It's a little bit hard to parse out at this point. You know, we've seen all manner of giving through different vehicles increase pretty drastically in the past year, so I'm not sure if I could quantify whether that is unique.
Great, thank you so much. Another question, this one from Paige. What is the most effective way to target millennial donors in your experience?
You know, this is Kate. I have a quick thought on that, and our friends from Planned Parenthood may want to comment on this as well. You know, my experience with this and what I have heard anecdotally from colleagues and clients in the field is that the path to giving for many millennials actually begins with engagement in advocacy work and volunteerism. So thinking about ways to engage millennials in the work of the organization first before soliciting their financial support seems to be a very effective strategy. And we've seen this, I think, in the environmental sector in particular, and around some of the issues that our panelists have talked about related to diversity, equity, and inclusion in particular.
Great. Still waiting for some more questions to come in. There's a questions box right there in your GoToMeeting control panel. We have just a couple minutes left. Here we go. This is for Evergreen. So what are the most effective ways you have discovered to engage young alumni in becoming donors?
This is Tiffany. That's a real growth area for us. Now that we've closed the campaign, we have an opportunity to engage our young alumni. I've held events for seniors in high school before they head off to college, an annual alumni barbecue, inviting them in to volunteer and connect with their former teachers has been really successful. I think there's a lot of opportunity to spend some time connecting with those students, young adults.
Great, thank you so much. Back to donor advised funds. You could just take a moment to clarify for people who aren't familiar with that term, what that means, and then also what's the best way to, what successful strategies have you implemented to reach donor advised fund donors, if that's even a thing?
Yeah, so thank you for the question, and I think I'll try a definition on for you, and my colleagues here can add or correct me as needed. But if you think about literally the words donor advised funds, in terms of the technical aspects of this, what happens is that a donor makes a gift to the fund holding organization, which can be a community foundation. It can be what we refer to as a national or a commercial fund, like a Fidelity charitable or a Schwab charitable or a Vanguard, you name it. And then there are some organizations that will actually also hold funds for donors. What's interesting is that once the gift is given to those organizations, it is technically owned and managed by that organization, and the donor becomes an advisor to how those funds are distributed. So the donor receives their tax benefit when they make that first gift, but then, you know, there could be $100,000 to $1 million to more sitting in a fund that then that donor works with the holder, community foundation or national or commercial fund, to quote unquote advise them on how they would like those dollars distributed. There have been some concerns expressed over the years that there's a lot of money just sitting in donor advised funds, and a statistic that was shared on the national webinar that we did last week was that we believe that 15 to 20%, there's a 15 to 20% payout annually from donor advised funds, which far exceeds, or one way to look at it is that far exceeds the 5% minimum payout that's required of other foundations. So the important thing to know is that once the gift is given, it is no longer technically in the donor's control, but they do play a very significant role in partnering with the organization or directing then how those funds are distributed. And I think just in terms of strategies for accessing those donors, we know that a very high percentage of donors that have funds at the national or commercial funds actually share their contact information with their giving. There's also been, you know, some discussion in this field that donor advised fund holders hide behind the funds and they're impossible to reach and connect with. So I would just say, you know, donor advised fund donors are people too, and you should treat them like any other donor that you would relate to. And I think that there is an increasing openness in community foundations in particular to partner with nonprofit organizations to bring causes, campaigns, and opportunities for support to the fund holders that they work with. So for those of you that have community foundations in your communities, I would highly and strongly encourage you to develop relationships with the donor advisors, philanthropic advisors in those community foundations. Build those relationships, because those will definitely ripple out to the donors that those advisors are working with.
Great, thank you so much, Kate. Well, we have actually gone beyond the end of our scheduled time here, so I'm going to wrap things up. If we didn't get to your question, don't worry, we will follow up with you. We have your information and your questions, and happy to follow up with you over email. On behalf of Collins Group and Campbell Company, we'd like to thank you again for joining us today. A huge thanks to our guest panelists. We also hope you'll take a moment to fill out a very short survey that will pop up on the screen as soon as the webinar ends. We'd love to hear what topics you're interested in, so please take a moment to share your thoughts with us. And once again, we thank you for joining us and have a wonderful first day of summer.